tuned in to Rebooting Liberty.
Have you ever wanted to have your own radio show? Rebooting Liberty Radio Network currently has openings for live programs. For a very small fee, we will create a show intro, bumper music, and provide technical production for your hour-long show. Email producer at rebootingliberty.com for details. You can find us at live.rebootingliberty.com.
This is the TK Radio Network.
Hey Sparky, how are you?
I am fantastic. How about you, Trevor?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to the second episode of Loud and Clear. I'm getting the hang of this now. It's pretty fun. It's fun, actually, isn't it? You know, you can say what you want and talk about the subjects you want. You don't have to be dictated to by anybody. And I have a fellow, a kindred soul in you to talk to.
I couldn't quite make out what you said. You just got bleeped out a few times. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it's great being able to talk about what you want to and to have a kindred soul like yourself to bounce ideas off.
We are in America, and being able to speak your mind is one of the founding tenets of being an American. Well, that and I think Honey Boo Boo lately, but you know. That's what being a human being is about, is being able to say what you want without fear.
And look, you know, Americans don't realize just how well how good you've got it. Like, I come from a country where you don't really have that. You know, we have hate speech legislation, we have political correctness, and if you think it's bad here, it's even worse over there. So, you know, there's things you just don't talk about. There's things you can't say. There's people you can't criticize. There's ideas you cannot discuss. And that's a horrible way to be. And New Zealand is one of the better countries out there, but it pales when it comes to for freedom of speech when compared to this country. You guys over here really don't realize just how well off you still are, and just how valuable that freedom of speech is.
Well, I think that we have here in this sphere, in our sphere, in the sphere of the people who are listening to us, understand that value, because if they didn't understand that value, they probably wouldn't be here. They would probably watching the aforementioned Honey Boo Boo or whatever the pastime is for people who are just completely asleep.
I got to get into Honey Boo Boo. Is it better than South Park or what?
Oh, whoa. I was being facetious about the Honey Boo Boo thing. That's some silly stuff, but the South Park, no, those guys are cool.
Yeah, they are cool.
Yeah,
they're very cool. They're as irreverent as you can possibly get. If you're not offended by watching one of their programs, you're not, you know, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, if you're not offended, you weren't watching.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that. See, that's the thing, isn't it? You know, freedom of speech, they talk about freedom of speech, but it is all about the ability to offend people. You know, what is freedom of speech if you can't say something controversial or offensive, something that's going to get people upset and wanting to throw things at you? If you can't do that, which political correctness is all about stifling, if you can't do that, it ain't freedom of speech.
You're absolutely right, and you actually said something that really resonates with me personally about, you know, you can't criticize. And there's a old adage, and I'm going to butcher it horribly, but it basically says that if you want to know who the tyrant is, he's the one you can't criticize.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The one who's beyond criticism. You know, how upset that certain people get if you criticize the president or criticize Obama. I remember I had a great interview in Connecticut, and some leftist got on the channel and said, "Are you implying that the president of the United States does not have the best interests of this country at heart? That he's working with people to bring this country down? Are you implying that?" And I said, No, I'm not implying it. I'm saying it straight out.
Boy,
He said, you can't say things like that. You know, this guy was just so offended and so upset. You know,
Did he have his spittle?
I'm sure it would have been, you know, but the more offended and the more upset he got, the happier I was. You know, it was just that sadistic joy of poking the stick into some simpering idiot like that. You know,
we are kindred spirits, aren't we?
Yeah, it was just, you know, I can see how sadists enjoy what they do, because it was just so much fun. You know, the more weakness he showed, the more I poked that stick in, and it was just wonderful. But, you know, like, people are probably listening to this, Sparky. It's probably not just you and I, and maybe we should, you know, talk about some issues of the day, do you think?
What issues of the day should we roll the roulette wheel on first? Because, I mean, there's just so much out there.
Well, one thing I would like to talk about briefly is Uncle Joe Biden, because he is, you know, there is talk that he may step into the ring. There's talk that Michael Bloomberg may step into the ring, you know, because I think it's pretty obvious that Hillary has got some very deep problems that she may not recover from. And Uncle Joe is a possibility. Maybe Uncle Joe standing with Elizabeth Warren, for instance, might be one of their possibilities, or Uncle Joe standing with Julian Castro. So, you know, I'll say this, you know, I've always really ignored Uncle Joe because I thought he was really just a bit of a buffoon and not a serious player. But I've been doing a bit of delving into him, and I've found some pretty disturbing things that made me have a little bit more respect. Respect may not be the best word, but a little bit more aware of how dangerous this man is and how much trouble he could be if he did get the Democratic nomination and even became the president.
I'm completely unaware of any of this.
Yeah, well, because you sort of think of Uncle Joe as little bit like Harry Reid. He's not really an ideological leftist so much. He's just a go-along to get along guy. But a couple of things I have discovered about Uncle Joe disturb me a lot. See, he got into the Senate in 1972 at the age of 29. And that was a huge, huge long shot. Nobody in the country thought he had any chance. It was against a popular Republican incumbent. This was a 29-year-old upstart. He'd served on a town council, I think. That was his only political experience. And he took out this popular Republican senator as a nobody. But what I found out is the reason he got elected, he was backed by an organization called the Council for a Livable World. And they put something like $285,000 into his campaign. And that's a lot of money in 1972 terms.
Yeah, it is.
That was over 40% of his budget, I believe, or it was an incredible big proportion of his budget. But the thing about the Council for a Livable World, hardly anybody in this country's ever heard of it. But it's one of the most influential and dangerous organizations in your country. They were started in 1962 by a man called Leo Szilard. Now, Leo Szilard was a Manhattan Project scientist. He was one of the key guys that invented the atomic bomb. But he was also a Hungarian communist. And while he was working for the Manhattan Project, he was regarded as a huge security risk and was eventually shunted out of that project. He then moved into the peace movement, the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists and the Pugwash meetings, etc. These were meetings set up to tilt American foreign policy and military policy in a left-wing direction, nuclear disarmament, etc., while the Soviets were busily building up their armaments. In 1962, he came up with a great idea. And by the way, Leo Szilard was named as a Soviet spy by Pavel Sudoplatov, a KGB defector. He was named as a Soviet spy in his 1994 book. So this was a guy who was a security risk, a Hungarian communist, and was passing on atomic information to the Soviets during the time he was employed by the Manhattan Project. After that time, Khrushchev passed down some directives that this nest of spies who was working for the Manhattan Project shouldn't be used for mere spying in the future. It was too dangerous. They should be used to influence American public opinion against nuclear armaments. So in 1962, Mr. Szilard sets up an organization called the Council for a Livable World. That was not its original name, but it turned into that after a couple of years. And the purpose of this group was very simple. What they would do, they were a PAC, a political action committee. They would gather money from donors, and they would find Senate candidates in very small states, and they would pump money into their campaigns, and they would choose progressive senators who had a record of pro-peace movement activity, who were not keen on America's military complex. So they would go to Delaware, they would go to Montana, they would go to states with very small populations, New Hampshire, etc., and they would fund Democratic senators with a huge amount of money, and they would get them elected. Once these senators were elected, Council for a Livable World would come to them and ask them to vote against nuclear weapons programs, anything that would boost America's military. The Council for a Livable World would come to these senators and ask for them to vote against it. And they boast on their website of all the weapon systems they've had cancelled, how they helped get the New START treaty negotiated with Russia, which was hugely disadvantageous to the United States. They boast on their website of how they have weakened America's military time and time and time and time again. They call it enhancing security. I would call it encouraging disarmament. So Biden was one of their first successes, and he boasts. He just did a video for their 50th anniversary in 2012. He boasted how he works with them still. They influence him. He consults with them, and they have guided his policies his entire political career. You know, this was a guy who put forward laws. He wanted the United Nations to American troops to be dedicated to the United Nations for peacekeeping, for instance. He's voted against all sorts of weapon systems. He's been a peace candidate. Now, the man who headhunted him, because Council for a Livable World at that time was headed by a man called Albert Gore Sr. Now, Albert Gore Sr. had been a senator from Tennessee. He'd just lost his seat, and he had gone to work for the Council for a Livable World. You might have heard of his son, Sparky, the guy who invented the internet.
Oh, Al Gore?
Yeah, this is Al Gore's father, Albert Gore Sr., senator from Tennessee. He was the protege and the business partner of a man called Armand Hammer. You may have heard of Armand Hammer. He was the man who basically kept the Soviet Revolution alive in the 1920s. He was the son of an American Communist Party leader. He became a businessman and set up trading relations with the Soviet Union in the very early days of the revolution. He was a very close friend of Lenin. He made billions of dollars basically trading with the Soviets, kept the Soviet revolution afloat. He was the man who founded Occidental Petroleum. So this man was the business partner and the protege and the mentor of Albert Gore Sr., and Armand Hammer was a bona fide Soviet agent. He was working at the behest of the Soviet Union to keep their revolution alive. So Joe Biden was elected to the Senate by an organization set up by a Soviet spy, and he was handpicked for the job. He was headhunted by the business partner of another Soviet spy. and he has been guided by these people ever since. Since that time, Uncle Joe has been to several conferences of progressive conferences in Europe with and in Latin America with people like Lula, the president of Brazil, who is a hardcore Marxist, and also with Michelle Bachelet, the socialist president of Chile, who did her university training in the old East Germany. So these are the people that Joe Biden is working with. And we may be talking more after the break about dear Joe Biden and what he's up to.
Hey, we've all had computer problems. The question is, what then? You gonna take that little darling down to one of them big box stores and turn it over to some kid whose voice changed last week? He's got more stainless hardware in his face than a Smith & Wesson pistol? Hell no. That's like taking a lame horse in for a pedicure. Let's be honest. You've shared things with your computer you wouldn't have with your best friend. Now that's a special bond. And you need someone who understands that relationship, can bring her back good as new. You need Jaffrey Computer. I know that old boy runs that place, and he's as good as gold and smarter than your 7th grade science teacher. Jaffrey Computers at jaffreycomputer.com. Trust no one else.
Hi, I'm Joe Perry. And Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, here for RAD, recording artists, actors, and athletes against drunk driving. Yeah, you know we love it when the music does the talking.
And you know, the music stops when someone gets killed.
So never let someone you know get behind the wheel if they've been drinking. So keep it real. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, be ready. Get a kit. Make a plan. Be informed. Learn how at www.ready.gov. Brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
But yeah, as we were talking about, Sparky, the Council for a Livable World is a very unknown organization, but they were set up by a Soviet spy, staffed by led by the business partner of a Soviet spy, and generally staffed by leftists, anti-American activists, and they've had a huge influence on America's Senate and Congress. Absolutely huge.
You know, I really hadn't heard in any, discernible way about the Council for a Livable Wage, but I always feel that it's important to understand why people do things. And what you're telling me is that the Soviets, forget about the pejoratives about communism, etc. We're talking about the other side's tactic was to use our freedoms to get us to disarm while they continue to arm. It's a brilliant tactic.
That's exactly right, and it's a very cheap tactic, isn't it? They can spend hundreds of billions of dollars arming themselves, or they can bribe and corrupt a few of your senators and get you to disarm. Which is cheaper in the long run, or which is more effective.
Now, speaking, I don't mean to cut you off because you just touched on something with the candidates and how cheap it is, and I'm on their site now, and they have a list of their senatorial and House candidates, and the list is like a who's who of all the people we don't want in office. They got Joe Sestak, Ted Strickland, Russ Feingold, Patrick Murphy, Brian Schatz. These are all their candidates for the Senate. And then they got below that their victories. Cory Booker, Dick Durbin, Al Franken, Ed Markey, Jeff Mark. Wow, they got two Markeys. Markey and Merkley. Okay, I'm sorry. Jack Reed, Tom Udall, Gary Peters, Brian Schatz, and there she is, Jean Shaheen. And then the same sort of thing over on the House side. They've got a list of victories, which is 10 or 15 victories, and I don't see the candidates. It says stay tuned for summer 2015 when Council of Livable Wage will begin to release their endorsements for the 2016 elections, but I don't see the House candidates. But yeah, they're right out saying, here are our candidates.
Yeah, and Barack Obama was amongst them, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, also Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, Elizabeth Warren. Virtually of your current senators, Democratic senators, Bernie Sanders was another one, and Angus King, the other independent. Of your Democratic and independent senators, only 5 of them have not been supported by Council for a Livable World. They've basically got the lot, including your whole leadership. They've been funding them and influencing them and corrupting them for decades now, and they've had a huge negative influence on your country, and nobody talks about them. They're an unknown organization to 90% of Americans, 98% of Americans.
Do you remember years ago when Fox News used to still be good, and Glenn was on the show at 5 o'clock every night, and he brought us some very eye-opening information about George Soros and everything that he's involved in. I feel as though you're bringing me something similar to that here, where, holy smokes, they're right under our nose, and they're doing it out in the open, and their history is that of the enemy.
Yeah, look, a lot of people didn't know about Soros until Glenn and David Horowitz exposed them. But this has been going on since 1962, way before Soros was in action. They have been influencing your senators, your leading senators, the leading people in your legislature, and they didn't just stop with the Senate. Now they've got a whole bunch of people in the House as well. So they've been influencing and effectively bribing, I would say, your senators for a very long time to disarm your nation. And if you look at the state of your country's military now, it is a very, very sad state of disrepair, just at the time the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians are going ahead militarily in leaps and bounds. The Chinese are building 400 nuclear submarines. The Russians are already way ahead of you in nuclear weapons and way ahead of you in conventional weapons, and that's just the Russians. We have to remember that Russia, China, and Iran are allies. They all work together in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a military, political, and economic pact and alliance. So while America has never faced as many and as well-armed enemies as ever in the past, America is now gutting its military. It's just weakening your military to a tremendous degree, and the Council for a Livable World, set up by a Soviet agent, is one of the main culprits in all of this.
It's literally the enemy using us to destroy us.
Yeah.
Who else does this? Now that I'm thinking about it, think about the oil and gas industry and all the anti-fracking people that are out there. Come to find out that a lot of the anti-fracking organizations are being funded by the Saudis.
And by the Russians.
Because they can use our freedoms to cause us to have a weaker position in their market. It's the same thing.
Exactly the same thing. So your country is now dependent on Venezuelan and Saudi oil, while the Russians are building up their, basically threatening Europe with their oil. The fracking movement and the anti-fracking movement in Europe is funded by the Russians, and they work with the Polish anti-fracking people and the French environmentalists and the German environmentalists to basically starve Europe of energy so that Russia is their only supplier. And you see the same thing exactly with the Saudis, working with the anti-fracking movement in your country. The environmental movement in your country, we're not just talking anti-fracking, but the whole environmental movement has been controlled by the communists forever. It's nothing to do with saving the environment or protecting the trees. It is all about destroying your ability to be energy independent. That's what it's about. It's about attacking your industry and attacking the fuel that drives it. That's what the energy movement is all about. And that's why you have Democrats like Raul Grijalva, who's the ranking Democrat on the Natural Resources Committee in your Congress, also backed by Council for a Livable World, by the way, who is basically working day and night to shut down your energy industry wherever he can. And this guy is a long-time ally of the Communist Party USA. He's worked with them for years. He used to write for their publication. He gave an award to a Communist Party teacher in Tucson just a year or two ago, commending this guy for his great work. This is a guy who organized his high school students to take off from school and organize a big demonstration in Tucson supporting illegal immigration. These are the kind of people you have working in your Congress, the people you are paying their salaries for. You're paying them to protect your Constitution, and they are working with your enemies to trash your country.
I hear it so often, people saying, these people in Washington or this president, they're incompetent, they're weak. But that's not really the case now, is it? When you change the basis of your assumption from they're trying their best to do what's right for America, if you change it from that to they're trying their best to harm us, suddenly they're not so weak anymore, are they?
They're not so stupid. Well, you look at Obama and the senior Democrats. If they were paid by the Russians or the Saudis to gut your Constitution, to destroy your military, to wreck your economy, and cancel out your national sovereignty, what would they be doing differently than they are today?
They would be doing exactly what they're doing today.
They're doing exactly. And so is this all incompetence? Are these highly educated people who've got degrees from some of the best universities in your country, are they that universally and persistently stupid that everything they do is to your detriment, and that's all by accident? That's all because they're just dumb.
They got their degrees on YouTube?
YouTube, did they?
Well, I mean, you said they got their degrees in the best universities in America, and
you made a point. You made a good point there. but this is, you're right. If Obama was just stupid, would he not make some mistakes in your favor once in a while?
You would think.
You would think. The laws of average says that, when you go gambling at Las Vegas and you just bet stupidly, you'll win occasionally, won't you?
Yeah, I mean...
once in a while.
Once in a while. You'll lose more than you win, but yeah.
Yeah, but you'll do some things right by mistake. A broken clock is still right twice a day. But Obama does things that are consistently bad for this country. I can't think of a single thing he's done that's good for this country. Can you think of one thing?
I would have to change my perspective on how to answer that, because we've rapidly become a divided country. So there's good for his country and good for the rest of us. So
yeah, but basically he's done nothing to get you to help your economy. He's done nothing to get your Constitution honored as it should be. He's done nothing to help your military restore its effectiveness. Everything he has done has made your country weaker, consistently from the first day he was in office. And that pattern has continued. And you still get people on Fox News saying it's because he's stupid. That just tells us that they are stupid, because nobody is that consistently destructive of your country, your economy, your Constitution, your military, who is that consistently and is stupid. This is deliberate malice. This is a deliberate program to bring your country to its knees. And it's working to the benefit of the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and all of your enemies around the world. So, nobody is benefiting from this except for them.
What do you suppose the ends are to all of these means? I mean, they're obviously justifying everything they do, but what are they working toward? I mean, you say to bring us to our knees, but what does that look like in the end?
Well, what that looks like, it could be one of a number of scenarios, but the ultimate aim is world socialism, a world socialist state, and probably using the United Nations as a framework. The major impediment to that has always been a strong, independent United States States and the ability to have a military that could basically destroy anybody on the planet. You know, America's always been able to destroy its enemies. It's always been able to stand alone and independent if it chose to do so. Usually it hasn't, because you've had so many bad guys in your government working against you. But the ultimate goal is, if you can't bring America to its knees economically, the goal is this: to bring America to its knees economically, to disarm America and destroy your sovereignty so you're incorporated into to become just another province of the world United Nations socialist superstate. If America is persistently refusing to go along, then military force may be required. And that is why you're being gutted militarily, and Russia and China and Iran are building up their military. They're working to destroy your alliances, to weaken NATO, to divide you from your allies so that you can be singled out and taken down. So that could be done through an EMP attack. It could be done through nuclear war or nuclear blackmail. It could be done through cyber war. It could be done by terrorist attacks, anthrax attacks, or probably a combination of the whole lot. So if America does not go willingly into the United Nations superstate, military force will be required. So that is why the enemies are arming, and that is why your military is being gutted. Either way, you have to be brought to your knees so you can be made to submit one way or another.
Yeah, it's the old velvet revolver. It's, the velvet nice now, but once we get past all that, the revolver comes out, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly, and people think, well, what would a world superstate look like, a socialist superstate? And they think, well, everybody will be like Sweden. We'll have health care, and we'll have, education for all, and we'll be a multicultural state, and everybody will live happily. I think the model will be more like a worldwide North Korea. Because if you think about this, the only reason you don't have universal totalitarianism now is because people have somewhere to run. They can still run to Western Europe. They can still run to Canada. They can still run to the United States or Australia or New Zealand. And that moderates, to some degree, the violence of the totalitarian states of the world. They have to give their people some breathing space, because their people can still run away to free countries. What if there are no free countries? What if America goes down, Canada goes down, Australia goes down, New Zealand goes down, Europe goes down? Europe's on the verge now of going under. The refugee crisis alone will see to that. What if America goes down, becomes part of the world superstate? What if the North Koreans and the Russians and the Iranians are the rulers of the planet and there is nowhere to run? What does the world look like then? Where is the liberal democratic state you're going to run to when that happens?
Those are really strong questions, and we'll have to pick this back up on the other side of the break. You are listening to Trevor on Loud and Clear on the TK Radio Network.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese.
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed,
680-1090-10-4.
could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it.
There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Yeah, so it's pretty scary times out there, Sparky. You know, people, they look at America and they think America's always going to be strong and it's going to lead the world. But, you know, the American military is in a very sad state. The American government is in a worse state, and the American economy is teetering on the brink. If any of those dominoes fall, what's that going to do to the rest of the planet? You know, is Canada going to be the world leader in freedom? Is Taiwan going to lead the world in freedom? Is Ireland going to lead the world in freedom? There's nowhere else that can do it but America. And if America goes down, you have a planet ruled by Iran and Putin and the Chinese. And what kind of world do you think that would be?
Oh, I think that would be a wonderful paradise where all the women have to follow 12 feet behind us.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, the women will all be in re-education camps. The whole world will be a labor camp. So you might get to see your wife every second year when you go for breeding time.
Oh,
you know, that'll be about it. You know, because they do have to breed their slaves. But I doubt you would have wives that would just be concubine. They'd just be women would be bred when suited, when needed. You know, basically. That is the brave new world of 1984. You know, the old communist dream of abolishing the family. When it's appropriate, that will still be applied. You know, right now they can't go that far because they don't have the power they want.
Well,
you know, I was going to tell you a little story.
Yeah.
When I had a friend training in Moscow in the 1980s. He infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party and he went to Moscow and trained at their big institute over there. And they told them openly, they said, look, the communist system as we have in the Soviet Union does not work. You know, they still have the wage system. The wage system is applied worldwide, and that's a big stumbling block to communism. We can only abolish the wage system when we have total power worldwide, and that's what we will do. And then they will abolish the family and abolish everything else that stands in the way of the communist dream. These people have never abandoned that. They're crazy people, and they'll keep going until they have North Korea all over the planet, and North Korea will seem moderate by what they have in mind.
You know, you're absolutely right, and don't take my word for it. Go or Trevor's. Go directly to the Communist Manifesto and read it. And as a matter of fact, to your point, I have in front of me a segment that has always stuck in my head. And it reads like this. The bourgeoisie family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes. And both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. And what it's saying is we must break the family bonds because parents instilling, you know, the parent to child is a child abuse, and we have to break that and indoctrinate them into communism through education.
Yeah, so that's chilling, is it not?
Yeah, the last line of "to this crime we plead guilty" is what stuck in my head, and I'm like, why are they saying this?
See, this is the thing. People look at Russia, the Soviet Union, and they look at China, and they still have families.
Yeah,
they still have wages. But people have to realize that's because they don't have world power yet. They cannot go all the way. They cannot abolish wages. They cannot abolish the family. It doesn't mean they don't want to. It doesn't mean that's still not on their agenda, but they've never had the whole world under their control. You've always had free countries in America. You've always had free Europe. You've always had Canada and Australia, Taiwan, Japan. When you have got those under your control, you can do what you damn well want. And if you think these communists have been working away for 100 years to just give up their little dream and not implement their fantasy, you're very naive. When they get world power, which they still intend to do, they will go hardcore to implement what they have been talking about since the 1840s. And that'll the horrors of that do not bear thinking about. So we have to stand very, very strong, because they want to implement this in the next few years. And if they can take America down through the Democratic Party, that will be the major stumbling block out of their way. And
I've got to wonder if we need to modify how we identify them, because we keep identifying, like you just did, as the Democrat Party. And I've got to wonder if we need to start identifying them as the government party. Because
that's a good point, Sparky, because the Democrats are the main way. The communists took over the Democratic Party. They took over the unions in 1995, and since that time they've been steadily taking over the Democrats and have pretty much finished the job. But you are right, see, only a very tiny proportion of the communists in America belong to the Communist Party or Democratic Socialists of America or Committees of Correspondence or Freedom Road Socialist Organization or whatever. Most of them are in the churches, in the universities, in the labor unions, in academia, in the media, and in government. They are the people who they're the government union people who just want more and more and more of the taxpayers' money. And there's a big chunk of them in the Republican Party too, who just want to expand the reach of government, to expand their power. So really, as I said the other day, this is not a war between Republicans and Democrats. This is a war between constitutionalists and pretty much everyone else.
That's a very good point. And the whole point about them being in education really does explain why the next line in that same Communist Manifesto that I was reading reads as such. But, you say, we destroy the most hallowed of relationships when we replace home education by social. That really does sum up our educational system and their visceral hatred for people who do homeschool, for instance.
Well, you look at the left absolutely hates homeschooling. They don't like charter schools a lot either, because it takes some people out of their clutches. And this has to be a universal thing. We can't have 5% of the population homeschooling their kids and not letting them be enlightened, not letting them see the future. And developing these retrogressive, conservative ideas. That's just absolutely abhorrent to the socialists, which is why you see increased pressure coming in on homeschooling, and you see a movement around the world to actually stamp it out. In my country, we do have homeschooling, and it's very popular, but you have to teach to the state curriculum. So you take all the trouble to take your kids out of school, and one of the parents stays home to homeschool. You lose all of that income.
Yep.
Cost you all that money, and you have to teach the state indoctrination anyway.
Yeah.
So isn't the whole point of homeschooling is you teach your children your values? You teach your children what you want them to learn. Isn't that the whole point of it?
It absolutely is, but they absolutely hate that because communists are a collectivist ideology. And I'll just read another segment here. I mean, the more I read this, the scarier it gets, the clearer the picture becomes. But the next segment I want to read is ironic, and it reads, "The communists have not invented the intervention of society and education, but they do seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class." And they're identifying. I find that ironic because they want to be the ruling class.
Exactly. So isn't it actually so chilling? No, people laugh at the concept of communism, and if they ever did believe in it, if they ever did worry about it, all they worried about was this big Soviet model where the state controlled a lot of stuff, but people still had their families, and they still had their little businesses, and they still earned wages, however poverty level they were, and that they thought was communism. That was just one step on the way, and they've had to retreat from that. But their goal when they get world power is to implement all the crazy things you've just been reading out.
Yeah.
You imagine the horror of living in a society where these people actually were able to carry out that whole program and carry it out to its nth degree. They've never had that opportunity before. Russia and China were just halfway measures at best. Even North Korea is only sort of 60% of the way. You imagine if they are in the position to carry out 100% of what they want. Imagine the destructive, it would just destroy humanity.
It absolutely was. And the more I know about it, the more it looks like the entire ideology is racing to a sort of a singularity that can never, ever, ever be achieved. And to illustrate what I mean by that is the bourgeoisie, the ones that they seek to destroy, the proletariat, which is, the working class in communism, or the lower classes. The proletariat seeks to destroy the bourgeoisie, but in doing so, they immediately become the bourgeoisie.
Exactly. And the big myth is we will be different. You'll get rid of the nasty capitalist exploiters. You put the working class, the 99%, the bottom of society on the top, and everything's going to be different. It's all going to be benevolent. It's all going to be this classless society where we all work in harmony to achieve common goals.
Of course.
It will be a tyranny as you have never seen before. And it will be a tyranny without the intelligence of the bourgeoisie, without the drive and the work ethic and the creativity and the productivity. It will be the dregs of society in command. But really it will never get there because it will be the communist elite who will destroy the bourgeoisie by using the proletariat. They will become a new elite and they will lord it over all in a most vicious and destructive fashion. You will never get this class of society. You will just get a new elite who will have none of the morality, none of the ethics, none of the productivity or creativity of the existing upper classes. It will just be an utter, it'll be the school bullies running the school with no teachers or no headmaster or no principal to keep them in check. It'll be the school bullies running everything. And you imagine living in a society like that, only the school bullies will have guns and the NSA and all sorts of technology to make you do what they want you to do.
And on that note, we got to run to break real quick. You're listening to Loud and Clear on the TK Radio Network.
This is the TK Radio Network.
Hey, we've all had computer problems. The question is, what then? You gonna take that little darling down to one of them big box stores and turn it over to some kid whose voice changed last week? He's got more stainless hardware in his face than a Smith & Wesson pistol? Hell no. That's like taking a lame horse in for a pedicure. Let's be honest. You've shared things with your computer you wouldn't have with your best friend. Now that's a special bond. And you need someone who understands that relationship, can bring her back good as new. You need Jaffrey Computer. I know that old boy runs that place, and he's as good as gold and smarter than your 7th grade science teacher. Jaffrey Computers at jaffreycomputer.com. Trust no one else.
Hi, I'm Joe Perry.
And Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, here for RAD, recording artists, actors, and athletes against drunk driving. Yeah, you know we love it when the music does the talking.
And you know, the music stops when someone gets killed.
So never never, never, never let someone you know get behind the wheel if they've been drinking. So keep it real. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Transportation, RAD, the National Association of Broadcasters, and the Ad Council.
You and your family are connected by routine, and you stick to it. But what if a disaster strikes without warning? What if your day's routine is disrupted and you can't reach your family? Have you planned for that? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, be ready. Get a kit. Make a plan. Be informed. Learn how at www.ready.gov. Brought to you by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Ad Council.
We've been a bit of a downer today, haven't we, Sparky, in little ways?
I'm having fun.
Yeah, well, we're having fun. We're having a good debate, and I love doing this, and I love talking about the theory of this. But Americans have got to have a little bit of hope, don't they?
Yes,
we do, and I'm in a sort of a unique position to talk about that because I've spoken over your country probably to 400 groups. I've been to 42 of your 57 states or something now, and still looking for some of them. But see, this is the thing, isn't it? We've got all these forces of evil arrayed against us. We've got the communists in the government. We've got the communists overseas. We've got Iran. We've got radical Islam. We've got an economy that's in huge trouble. But I'm still hopeful, because I go around, I see all these people standing up, pissed off, wanting to take their country back. And you've been in this position before, you were done in that Revolutionary War. Washington's army was almost defeated on several occasions. You could have been destroyed in the Civil War. You could have been destroyed in the Cold War. But every time America has come back, and I think the bad guys are in for a mighty big shock over the next few years. Because I think this army that's building, the Tea Party has educated so many people, Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, TK Radio, media outlets like yourself. There's a whole bunch. When freedom is about to be taken away from you, people are waking up to just how precious it is. And there's a real groundswell out there. And you see that in the Trump movement. You see that in the people behind Ted Cruz. You see that in the Tea Party activists. You see that in the rebellion that's going on inside the Republican Party. And that's pretty impressive stuff. So, America still has all these weapons. America still has a dynamic economy. America still has a massive infrastructure. America has all these educated people out there with the right policies and a constitutional president and a constitutional Senate and a House. You could still turn this country around in a very, very short space of time. And with the technologies, you're a techie, You know the technologies that are on the horizon.
Oh, yeah.
The internet technologies, the 3D photocopying, all the amazing stuff that's out there that could transform the civilization. If we can keep America together for the next few years, we can restore the Constitution and allow these technologies to come on stream. You can have a new golden age on this planet. You can have a future that we just cannot begin to comprehend now.
I agree with you 90%. And what I mean by that is I don't know that we can turn it around per se. I think that this journey that we're on is a straight line. And this train is most definitely going to go through the tunnel. The real question that I believe is what kind of people are we going to be on the other side of the tunnel? Because it will come. And what do we do now to prepare for the other end of the tunnel?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is gonna get worse before it gets better. No matter whether the socialists in power or the constitutionalists are in power, there's going to be hard times ahead. But how long's that tunnel going to be, and how long till we see the light at the other side? And as you say, what kind of people will Americans be coming out of that tunnel? You know, they're the crucial questions, aren't they?
It truly is, because as you know, I myself do some Second Amendment stuff, and one of the things that we understand in the Second Amendment realm is that when it comes between a battle of good and evil, the good guys don't always win. So what happens if we lose? And that is just an unaffordable consequence of negligence on this side of the tunnel.
Yeah. See, you remember back in the 60s when we used to play Cowboys and Indians, we had this little saying, the goodies will always win in the end. That was our accepted thing, wasn't it? Good will always win.
Sure.
Maybe you're a little bit too young to remember that, but that's the way we thought. And that's been diluted a lot now. And you're right, you know, the good guys have lost in the past. But in the long term, see, this is it, isn't it? You know, America is now a little bit like Rome was.
Yep.
You know, it's getting invaded by aliens. It's debauching its currency. The economy's gone down. Your allies are deserting you. You know, there's division in the ranks, and your elites are decadent to the core. You know, that's where America is right now. But Rome went through several regenerations before its final fall. I'm hoping that America can be the country in history that breaks that pattern, that can actually regenerate without having to go through a violent war to do so, without having to go through huge loss. And I think there's a core of people out there now who are going to, you know, the Tea Party groups, the networks, the conservative groups, the philosophers, who will keep things together enough through the coming crises that the crisis doesn't have to be too deep or too long, and the regeneration can be very quick. Who knows? You know, none of us can predict the future, but I do know that the people like yourselves, you know, the 3% I call it, that 3% is going to decide the fate of basically not just America, but really the whole planet. And I'm optimistic that 3% can hold things together.
Well, I'm certainly looking to you for that optimism, because it does get very hard to stay optimistic when you see such horrible things on the horizon and everybody's calling you crazy for it. So I'm going to look to you for the upbeat. Is that okay?
So it's my responsibility. Eh? Yeah, well, that's the thing. You know, you got to have that broad sweep of history, but you've also got to have, and I'm not a particularly religious guy, but I look at America and I can see that America is not where it is today because atoms collided. You know, America has always had has had guidance from above, hasn't it? You cannot deny that. America never should have been created, but it was created as a special place for special people. But sometimes even special people get complacent and they take their eye off the ball and they stand to lose what they have been given. And that's where America is now. But there's always been that remnant, hasn't there? There's always been that 2 or 3% who never took their eye off the ball and always guided America through the hard times. And that's where we are now. And I see that percentage as growing day by day. You see things like the growth of the home church movement. You know, the people are disgusted with the weak, wimpy Christian churches of America today, so they're going to the home churches. People are disgusted with the Republican Party, so they're going to the Tea Party movement. They're trying to take the Republican Party back, you know, from the rhinos. So all of these things are happening. There is a resurgence out there. There is an urgency out there that I have not seen before, that I did not see coming. But it is very inspiring, and I think I'm quite unique in that I've probably talked to more Tea Party groups in this country than any other living person, in over 30, nearly 40 states across your union. So I have.
You're listening to Rebooting Liberty Radio Network, compelling and entertaining talk.
Don't touch that dial.